Very good morning, everyone who is attending this special event that we are organizing this morning at CSIS in cooperation with BNPB and UNDRR. Before we start, I think I would like to invite our Executive Director, Dr. Jose Rizal Damuri, to give his welcoming remarks. Dr. Damuri, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Phillips. A very good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. May I first welcome all of you who join us on our Zoom platforms and also on CSIS YouTube channel. A special warm welcome to Excellency Mami Mizutori, Special Representative of United Nations Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, and also the head of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, will deliver a special public lecture this morning with the theme Elevating Global Cooperation on Disaster Risk Reduction and Indonesia's Strategic Roles. I'm really sorry, Excellency Mami Mizutori, that I cannot join you in CSIS together due to the current COVID situations. I hope we have time to meet and to discuss in Bali this year. In Indonesia, we are, of course, very familiar with disasters, both man-made and a natural disaster. We have witnessed big disasters such as earthquake and tsunami in Aceh region, frequent volcanic eruptions, or annual occasions of forest fire. With also increasing incidents related to the change of climate and extreme weathers such as floods, drought, and unpredictable seasons. These disasters have caused a lot of pain, lost a lot of lives, and cost a lot of economic resources. And the most poor and vulnerable part of population are especially at risk and more likely to suffer the disaster effect of the disaster. And although in Indonesia is one of the most prone regions to disasters, there are still a lot of aspects that we need to improve in order to mitigate the impact. Majority of Indonesian population remain to have poor understanding on the risk from disasters. We also face various issues in implementation, such as coordination on communications between various stakeholders. This is actually where CSIS try to contribute by taking part in public discussion and provide platforms for stakeholder engagement. And CSIS actually just started following the issues on disasters management around 4 years ago. This is a new area for us, which in the past focused mostly on traditional strategic subjects such as geopolitics, security, or economy. However, we are very glad we started this special unit, since during the pandemic, for example, during the events of natural disaster, we already contribute to the policy formulation and implementations of various necessary actions. And allow me to express my appreciation again to Excellency Mami Mizutori, who has taken the time to give a public lecture at CSIS. And as we know, this year, Indonesia assumes G20's presidency position, in which greater cooperation is one of the big themes that the country tried to promote under this G20 presidency. And I believe these lectures also would provide us new insights on how to elevate global cooperation, especially on disaster risk reduction. And we think that Indonesia could also promote those global cooperations, including also in the disaster risk reductions. So with that, I thank you again to everyone for joining, despite today is actually a holiday. And we'll hand over the microphone to Philip, who would chair and moderate the lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That is Dr. Jose Rizal Damuri, our Executive Director. Now, I will, as mentioned by Dr. Jose Rizal Damuri, will chair and moderate the session. Also, as I myself is the convener of the Disaster Management Research Unit at CSIS. And as mentioned by Dr. Jose Rizal Damuri, thank you for reminding everyone, every one of us, that Indonesia this year is hosting two important roles, right? Number one is the G20, which is of course a big responsibility. And as Dr. Jose Rizal Damuri, our executive director, mentioned, that Indonesia aims to strengthen international cooperation in light of the pandemic that the global world is facing. And of course, second event or second role that Indonesia is playing this year, equally important at the global level, is that Indonesia will be hosting the GPDRR, or Global Platform on Disaster Risk Reduction, in May in Bali. Hopefully, we will be able to go there, in May 2022, to foster and more cooperation as well on the disaster risk reduction. And it is in this relation to the GPDRR in May 2022 that we are having this public lecture this morning with Her Excellency Mami Mizutori, the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction and Head of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, with the topic certainly about how to elevate international cooperation on disaster risk reduction. If I may, I would like to briefly read out some of her long career and CV that I think will be very important for us to know, and to then getting more insight and wisdom from Excellency Mami Mizutori. Her Excellency Mami Mizutori is the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction and Head of the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, based in Geneva, Switzerland. The role of the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction is to support countries and stakeholders in the implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030. The special representative ensures the strategic and operational coherence between disaster risk reduction, climate change, and sustainable development agendas, as well as the linkage with the UN Secretary General's prevention agenda and with humanitarian action. Excellency Mizutori served for 27 years in various capacities in the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Prior to joining the UN, Excellency Ms. Mizutori was Executive Director of the Sainsbury Institute for the Study of Japanese Art and Cultures, University of East Anglia, UK, since 2011. Excellency Ms. Mizutori graduated in law from Hitotsubashi University in Tokyo and obtained a diploma in international studies from the Diplomatic School of Spain. A Japanese national, Excellency Ms. Mizutori speaks Japanese, English, and Spanish. Now, if I may, once again, that this discussion is organized into kind of 3 questions, if I may. That is, number one, what would be the most risk that should be anticipated by the world? Given those risks, what kind of innovative cooperation that is expected to take place during the 7th GPDRR? This is just a general question that I think Ms. Mizutori will also touch upon in her lecture today. And then how does the UNDRR transform the current disaster risk into future resilience through the upcoming GPDRR? That's, I think, I hope you will touch upon, although you prepare some kind of a speech and lecture materials. But from the discussion, I think with the participants on Zoom and YouTube, we are hoping that we will get that kind of insight so that we will help the Indonesian government preparation as well towards the GPDRR in May 2022. Excellency, the screen is yours.
Well, good morning, Dr. Jose Rizal Damuri and Dr. Phillips Bermonte. Thank you very much for your kind invitation to speak at this prestigious Center for Strategic and International Studies of Indonesia at the time of my official mission to Jakarta, Indonesia, to prepare for, as already have been referred by both the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction, which will be hosted by your government in May this year in Bali. And I'm delighted to hear that you now have a disaster risk management unit so fit for a country which is moving forward the DRR agenda as a leader in the global sphere. Ladies and gentlemen, it is evident that risk is part of our life. And of course, this is nothing new, as life for everyone is always a bit risky. Yet, I think you would agree if I say that in our lifetime, life has never been uncertain nor vulnerable as it is right now. This is the time that we are going to hold this important global platform for disaster risk reduction in Indonesia. Earlier this month, the World Economic Forum released the Risk Perception Report, and the top 3 risks in this report over the next 10 years are all related to climate change. This itself is not a surprise to anyone, even as we still are living through the impact of the global pandemic, which is cascading throughout the global system, the national system of all countries, and of course our local systems. Climate change and the growing number of intense disasters which are related in one way or another to the climate emergency, this looms heavily in the background of our lives. We go further down the report's list, and there are many other risks that are named: technological risks, geopolitical risks, economical risk, and societal risk. But what is not evident just by the list is the following. It is the fact that how intertwined all the risks are, how they overlap with one another, and how vulnerability to one risk can create and increase vulnerability to others. This is the nature of risk that we are surrounded by. What we are living through and what the COVID-19 pandemic has amplified is exactly this, that one event can set off a chain reaction with far-reaching and unintended consequences in so many different sectors, in all aspects of our lives, and in so many far away parts of the world, but frightfully at the same time. As risk multiplies, increasing impacts affect whole communities and whole systems. Global impacts become local, and local impacts become global. And they penetrate across all sectors, creating new challenges. Everyone is living downstream of someone else's choice of action or inaction. Perhaps you are familiar with the term the butterfly effect. This is the idea that a single butterfly flapping its wing can cause a storm on the other side of the world. This may sound a bit exaggerated, but the butterfly effect speaks to 2 important ideas. One is that a small action can have a huge impact. And second, that interconnection is the foundation of our contemporary life on this planet. If we say this in another way, every effort counts, and therefore we cannot escape each other. Now, every effort counts. This is something that we at the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, we know very well. As the UN agency in charge of supporting countries on minimizing losses from disasters, we know that small steps taken to prepare for disasters can influence outcomes positively. We know that every dollar invested in reducing risk and prevention can save up to $15 in post-disaster recovery and reconstruction. And we know that small investments can lead to big savings in lives and livelihoods, economies and communities. And importantly, we know, and we, all of us, make it our daily work to remind everyone that resilience is not an extra cost. It is a wise investment. UNDRR's activities are guided by the document Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which was adopted in 2015 and which seeks to substantially reduce disaster risk and minimize the toll disasters can take on individuals, communities, and countries, and in particular on the most vulnerable. We support member states and other stakeholders with the implementation of the Sendai framework so that the SDGs can be achieved, so that we can better respond to disasters that come and better manage what disasters leave behind. Indonesia, a great country, great nation, an archipelago with 17,000 islands, is located along the most seismically active zone in the world, as we know. Many times, your compatriots have told me that you are a department store of disasters. Now, sadly, not a very good department store in the sense of you can enjoy your shopping there. And it is somewhat similar to the country of my origin, Japan. But this dire reality, this challenge has resulted in Indonesia to make great strides in building resilience and taking forward disaster risk reduction. As I mentioned, the Sendai framework was adopted in 2015. Since then, Indonesia has demonstrated a strong commitment to achieving the targets and priorities of this global blueprint for disaster risk reduction and resilience. You have also become a regional and global leader worth emulating and actually emulated. And this year, as we have already mentioned, you will be hosting the most important conference for disaster risk reduction agenda. So for the next minutes, I would like to focus on 5 global priorities that are critical to reducing disaster losses and note where and how Indonesia has demonstrated considerable progress in each one of these priorities. The first area relates to establishing strong and good risk governance. As mentioned, the nature of contemporary risk is complex and interconnected. In particular, COVID-19 has demonstrated that the traditional model of a single agency trying to pursue a single hazard, this is not effective anymore in the face of complex risks and compounded disasters. All countries need to plan against multiple and simultaneous risks affecting various sectors and populations. We need to put in place comprehensive risk governance where all actions and agencies have a seat at the decision-making table. And Indonesia, here we see the basis for this approach in the form of the 2020-2044 Disaster Management Master Plan, which was approved by a presidential regulation in September 2020. It sets forth the conditions for mainstreaming disaster risk reduction across the government through guidelines that apply to all ministries agencies, the National Defense Force, National Police, and regional governments. Furthermore, the 2020-2044 Disaster Management Master Plan is an integral component of the National Medium-Term Development Plan, ensuring that risk-informed development is happening across Indonesia. This is so very important because we know that nothing undermines sustainable development like disasters. So disaster risk reduction policies have to be at the heart of all development decisions. Furthermore, in this rapidly changing world, plans can quickly become outdated, obsolete. Therefore, the Master Plan of Indonesia seeks to ensure relevance by breaking up the implementation over 5 stages. Each stage is guided by an individual 5-year national plan, with the first one already in effect, covering the years between 2020-2024. These plans will serve as a reference for provincial governments to establish their own plans. And what is more, Indonesia has established a pooling fund for disasters, which was created in August last year, again through a presidential regulation. And I understand that this should go into implementation soon. Now, this brings me to the second priority area, which is about building local disaster resilience. Not surprisingly, disasters' impacts are felt most at the local level. Cities and communities are at the front line of disasters. Indeed, the vast majority of disasters tend to be small local events, which often don't make the global headlines nor the national headlines, but these are the disasters that come again and again, disrupting lives, livelihoods, causing loss and damage. And this is where the local governments struggle. National plans and strategies are, of course, important, but they are only as effective as their ability to protect people locally in their communities. In this regard, Indonesia stands out in its resolve to build local resilience. In 2018, the national government regulated through the Ministry of Home Affairs that every local government should focus on disaster risk information, prevention, preparedness, and response. Moreover, since many local authorities lack the capacity and also resources to build their resilience on their own, the mandate was coupled with strong national support and expanded by public-private partnerships. A great example of this is Indonesia's success in building disaster resilience for 300 schools across the country through the Safe Schools and Disaster Resilient Village program. And I am very much looking forward to visit one of these safe schools during my mission this week. Since 2012, Indonesia has been an early and very strong adopter of what is called the Making Cities Resilient campaign, which my organization, UNDRR, took forward. After raising awareness through this campaign for local resilience during a decade, in 2020, UNDRR, with core partners including UN Habitat, the World Bank, and now also UNDP, we launched the updated version of this campaign, which is called the MCR 2030, Making Cities Resilient 2030. This new initiative seeks to help local governments to understand, plan, and very importantly, implement their own disaster resilience plans. We are delighted that Indonesia has committed to signing up municipalities in the Bali province this year, as well as signing up all provinces in the country by 2024 and all municipalities by 2030. Now, of course, all the best plans, resources, and intentions cannot be fully effective if they do not include those who need them most. Disasters affect all of us, but not in the same way. This is where the third priority comes into play, which is understanding the risks that different groups face, as well as their unique needs and vulnerabilities. It means having a robust disaster risk information system that collects the most relevant data around how the impact of disasters affect differently according to gender, age, disability, and income. This information needs to be combined with risk assessment and information on past disaster losses, as well as future climate risk assessments and information on future economic development and population growth. Indonesia's National Medium-Term Development Plan 2020-2024 sets strengthening disaster-related data and information as a condition and foundation for effective disaster risk management. And to this end, the National Disaster Management Agency, BNPB, our partner, and BPS Statistics Indonesia developed the Indonesia One Disaster Data Framework in 2020. This framework integrates data sources from various government agencies and standardizes methods of measuring cross-disaster events. This national and comprehensive disaster-related statistics system supports DRR decision-making, as well as assisting with national and international indicator reporting. Areas of coverage include data and statistics on disaster risk, occurrence, impact, and recovery, as well as financing at all stages of disaster risk management and disaster management. This national framework will be the main reference for aligning data management needs during all disaster situations in the country. It is the first of its kind in Indonesia, but also in the region, and is in line with the President of Indonesia's One Data policy. The fourth priority, this area speaks to how early warning must trigger early action. The focus of the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction this year on 13 October is the last of the 7 global targets of the Sendai framework, Target G, which is about enhancing the access to multi-hazard early warning systems. Given Indonesia's history of dealing with deadly disasters, including the 2004 Indonesian Ocean tsunami, in the more recent eruption of Mount Semeru on Java Island, this is a crucial challenge that separates life and death for many Indonesians. After the 2018 earthquake and tsunami that struck Sulawesi, UNDRR partnered with UNESCO and Indonesian organizations to review how the early warning system performed during that disaster. The report listed a number of recommendations for future hazards, taking into account local complexities, and we are pleased that the government has made many improvements to the system, and it is important that this improvement continues. We must learn from every disaster, and we cannot waste no disaster. Moreover, the government has now adopted a more community-centered approach for early warning systems. It seeks to ensure that no one is left behind and to empower at-risk communities so that they can act in sufficient time and in an appropriate manner once a warning is received. This commitment to multi-hazard early warning system and early action has resulted in the deployment of 117 early warning sites covering medium and high risk areas as of 2020. Now, last but not least, I would like to draw your attention to the fifth priority, which is to ensure and operationalize the policy and science nexus. All policy decisions for disaster risk reduction and resilience need to be guided by science and evidence. And while formal scientific institutions have an important role to play in this process, science and knowledge are not bound to protocol. This is why countries must seek to promote innovation in disaster risk reduction across the board, especially among the youth. Youth are not constrained by past convictions. They can bring in innovation that can leapfrog progress towards resilience. In this regard, I would like to refer to His Excellency President Joko Widodo's insight in empowering and mobilizing young scientists. In 2018, UNDRR was proud to participate in the Indonesia Science Expo under the patronage of the President, encouraging young scientists to contribute towards advancing disaster risk reduction. The expo resulted in the launch of the original You Inspire chapter of Youth and Young Professionals, which is dedicated to discovering new ways to build resilience at both the national and local level. Since then, You Inspire has grown into a movement that includes more than 1,000 members in 12 countries around Asia Pacific. This would not have been possible without Indonesia's strong leadership. Indeed, Indonesia's leadership in disaster risk reduction has been commendable on many levels, not least of all in hosting, again, may I repeat, this year's global platform in Bali at this very important time. Why? Because it is important because we are now preparing for the midterm review of the Sendai framework, which will culminate in May 2023 at New York at a very high level meeting where it is envisaged that a negotiated political declaration will be adopted. And it is envisaged and very much expected that the political commitment to implement the Sendai framework towards the SDGs achievement will be enhanced. This is why this global platform is so important, because the outcome and the recommendations that will come out from the global platform will be fed into the midterm review. In closing, I would like to acknowledge Indonesia's commitment and determination in taking forth this very important work of building resilience locally, nationally, regionally, and globally, from the highest political level down to individual communities. Your approach truly embodies the whole of society spirit of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. If the butterfly effect reminds us that small actions count, then this country, with nearly 550 species of butterflies of your own, has taken so many important actions from small to large that have benefited us all. And for this, we at UNDRR is deeply grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for such a detailed and comprehensive presentation. And of course, thank you as well for highlighting what Indonesia has been doing in terms of disaster risk reduction that may be a lessons to share for the international community in our efforts to reduce the misery of disasters if one strikes. And secondly, I want to remind the participants that you can post your questions through our YouTube channel, and that then it will be relayed to us here, as well as you can use the chat box function in your Zoom platform, and then it might also be answered by our distinguished speaker, Excellency Mami Mizutori. Now, while waiting, if I may start the question, and while waiting for others to jump in with the questions if they have, would you kindly explain to us or update us on the role of regional organization in terms of disaster risk reduction? Because, of course, Indonesia is part of ASEAN, and Southeast Asia is also prone to disasters. And then might be some other lessons from various regional organizations across the globe, from your perspective and experience at the UNDRR office.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Phillips Belmonte, for your question, which is very important. Now, for all the global agendas for the achievement, regional organizations are very important. But I would say that for the disaster risk reduction, it is crucial. Why? Disasters do not observe boundaries, right? Any disaster can move from one country to another. Let's just think about the most recent Tonga situation where the underwater volcano erupted. It affected countries as far as Peru. And so if a region does not have its own strategy for disaster risk reduction, it's not enough for each country to have it. So this is why I believe that the ASEAN cooperation, which is, of course, one of the most successful regional corporations in the world, it is very highly important that you have an important component for disaster risk reduction, disaster preparedness, and disaster response. It all comes together. And I believe that, again, this is a model that can be really emulated by other regions, particularly regions where conflicts are very stark. Because again, even if you have countries in a region which are in conflict or have potential elements of conflict lingering, if you cannot cooperate at the time of disaster, then it is disastrous for both countries and both citizens. So to give you another example, most recently, the Central Asia region came up with a regional disaster risk reduction strategy, which is an achievement because honestly, there are not many things that some regions cannot agree on. But fortunately, disaster risk reduction is something that all regions can agree on. And in a way, it also enhances the regional integrity. So it is very important.
Thank you. Now I see in the Q&A box, but I could not see from here if can the organizing committee pass it on to me so I could read out. Okay, there's this question now. I can read it from here. From participant Mia, is there any specific issue for gender, disability, and social inclusion that we need to put concern into in terms of DRR?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. Now, as I mentioned, disasters affect all of us, but not equally. And there are millions of examples. We know that in terms of gender, women and girls are those who are the most affected. And this comes from various reasons because of sometimes the level of education that they receive, even in terms of early warning and early action. And for example, in the Aceh tsunami, in the Indian Ocean tsunami, there were many women who perished because in this region, because many of them did not learn how to swim. Now, this seems so basic, but such is the difference in terms of when it comes to education, and it has an enormous impact when disaster strikes. Disability, which in a way, I think we can include aging as well. During the 2011 great East Japan earthquake and tsunami, the number of people of senior age, and also, although the data is not complete, the number of people with disabilities who perished was disproportionately high compared to those who were younger or did not have disability. And also, we are learning, sadly, that it is the case with COVID-19 as well. So again, gender, persons living with disability, and of course, income. Of course, income, because let's just think about where people are living. It is something that we all know that we should not construct our houses in disaster-prone areas, an area which is prone to flooding. But people who do not have income, people who live in slums, which is constructed in such an informal way that it has no structure and it is precarious, they do not have a choice. And so all these factors, people who are vulnerable are disproportionately affected. And this is one of the elements that makes a hazard into a disaster. A hazard does not have to become a disaster. A hazard, when it is combined with vulnerability and exposure, becomes a disaster. So what we need to do is really understand the vulnerability that exists in our society and mitigate that vulnerability.
Thank you. I think I hope that would answer the question from Mia. Now I have a second question. Let me check. It is relayed to me through WhatsApp. Indonesia have many websites related to disaster information systems. Would you share your experience? What kind of information that would be most crucial to be available on this kind of publicly available websites? Because sometimes, you know, websites are, there are so many websites, but in terms of policy makings and how people respond, that would not be really helpful.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I think it's very good. It's wonderful that there are so many websites in Indonesia, because you need information around risk. You need information around disasters. That is the first thing. But of course, the information has to be accurate, right? Accurate in many ways. The first priority of the 4 priorities of the Sendai framework is to understand the disaster risk that is surrounding you. And this means to understand what other types of risk that has historically resulted into disasters in the area you live, in your country, in your region, in your community. The other information that is very important is around early warning and early action. These websites do need to contain information on the early warning system, and importantly, it needs to be a tool that educates us all to respond to the early warning, because early warning without early action does not work. It also has to tell us again about the vulnerabilities. Talking about people living with disability, this is another episode that I wanted to bring with you. 2011, after that, I went, after assuming this post, to Japan, and I had a conversation with the people who were living there with disability. And they said that they had a very tight community among the people living with disability, but the people around them who did not have disability were not aware of their existence and aware of their needs. And therefore, at the time when the earthquake and tsunami hit, they were very vulnerable. Now, I know this is sensitive because it is about individual information, and maybe this is not about something that you want on the website, but the fact that vulnerability is something that community members should know about and be able to identify, I think is very important. And lastly, I would say that Unfortunately, there is a lot of what we call infodemics around disaster risk, around false information, around false information with even malicious attempts, right? So you need to be very careful of the origin of the information which is on the website. And that is why, as I mentioned, the fifth priority is around the evidence-based policy, science-based policy, but you can say the same thing. Evidence-based information, science-based information, beware of where the information comes from.
Thank you. I think that is a very wonderful response to the question. And now it seems that you've got a lot of questions now because I think this is a very important topic. This is, I think, from someone with the Indonesia You Inspire Alliance, from Rahma Hanifa. Thank you so very much, Ms. Mami Mizutori, for your acknowledgement on You Inspire Alliance. This is really something and motivating us. We are honored and happy to share that You Inspire has started its movement in the Pacific through the establishment of You Inspire Fiji, and in Africa, starting in Malawi, currently 14 country chapters. That includes Indonesia. We are also delighted that the National Research Innovation Agency of Indonesia, BRIN, which merged the Indonesian Sciences Institute and 4 other agencies along with many research divisions from ministry, is currently in the process of establishing the Research Center for Disaster. Your 5 key points will be a guidance for both BRIN and You Inspire. We look forward to continue having your guidance, support, and strengthen partnership with UNDRR and initiative with CSIS. Thank you for mentioning CSIS here, but this is very interesting development because our National Research Agency also establishing the Research Center for Disaster. I think this is a welcoming development in Indonesia. Now, there's a question from Ed Wright. Based on your background, does Japan have anything to share with Indonesia in the area of DRR?
Okay, well, thank you. May I first respond to Dr. Hanifa's comment? I would like to thank Dr. Hanifa because she has been so instrumental as a young female scientist in the area of disaster risk reduction to create and expand this network. As a matter of fact, for those who do not know, I want to share you with one information concerning Dr. Hanifa. So we started last year a project funded by the Australian government, which is called WinDRR. And this is a project to enhance women's leadership in disaster risk reduction because of many reasons, right? I mentioned that gender is one of the issues that we need to tackle. And when we talk about vulnerability in disaster risk reduction, we shouldn't think about these vulnerable people as people that we want to protect. Of course, we need to protect them, but we need to, most importantly, make them agents of change themselves. So we need to bring them into the policy decision table. And this is true with women. So when DRR started, and last year for the first time, 2 awards were given. One for the expert group. So the lady who got it is the first women director of a disaster management agency in Fiji. And the other award went to Dr. Hanifa. This is the award for Rising Stars, young women who are working in order to make disaster risk reduction a mainstreamed issue. And Dr. Hanifa, because of her achievement in You Inspire, because of her own research and because of her leadership, has been awarded. And I must say that youth is one of our most important stakeholders right now. This is the centerpiece of the Secretary General's agenda to bringing in the youth in the achievement in the implementation of all the global agenda, the youth many times tell us, you're doing more for youth, but you're not doing enough with the youth. And You Inspire, I think, is a wonderful example of doing something, doing a lot with the youth. Now, going to the question, so thank you very much for asking about Japan. I do feel that Japan, again, like Indonesia, has suffered for thousands of years from many disasters. And like Indonesia, geophysical disasters, but also extreme weather-related ones, has quite a good record of disaster risk reduction. So a lot of the things that are happening already in Japan have been already implemented here, but I would say that two important things. One is that a lot of the risk governance in Japan is based on law, legislation. And this is important for any country. And as I have already shared with you in my speech, that Indonesia has many presidential regulations, which is actually about this. The importance about law-based risk governance is that they will not change easily with the change of leadership. And again, once you make it into a law, it can be updated according to the change of the situation around disaster. This is something that Japan did. It started in the 1950s when a big typhoon came and devastated the country. And since then, and at that time, they made the basic law for disaster management. And since then, it has been updated. The other thing that I would say, and again, related to risk governance, is that Japan every year publishes the White Book for disaster risk reduction. This is about not only what kind of disasters had hit the country, but also informing the public in a transparent way all the new legislations, the policies that have been adopted, not only at the national level, but at the local level as well. And by publishing this white book every year, updating the information around disaster risk management, not only the government, but the local people, everybody is aware what is happening and what needs to happen more. And this is, I think, a very strong foundation, and a foundation that is needed for countries such as Indonesia and Japan, where we cannot move from where we are. We are challenged by the situation, and we need to keep on doing better in disaster risk management.
Thank you, Excellency. I think that two important lessons from Japan. Indonesia is also starting to adopt legislation. As you mentioned, at the presidential level, there are so many decisions by the president. And now we also have the disaster management law that is continuously being reviewed. And that hopefully will be a good reason for Indonesia to have a better preparedness. And secondly, the idea of a white book on disaster, I think it's also a very important one. I know BNPB publishes some kind of a report every year, but mostly on the type of disasters that occurred in Indonesia and so on. And the experience of Japan that include more information about legislations, about government policies, that would be also, I think, one area of improvement that we can learn from Japan. Now, third question. I think, let me see, from Delil Khairat. Dear Excellency Mizutori, how do you see financial preparedness of developing countries, as particularly Indonesia, against disaster? For example, in terms of utilizing insurance instead of relying too much on foreign debt?
Well, thank you again for that very important question. So financing disaster risk reduction, financing prevention is actually the biggest challenge we have. All countries, developing countries, developed countries, the international community as well. One of the 7 global targets of the Sendai framework is to enhance international cooperation for disaster risk reduction. However, in a study that we launched last year on the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, we had to publish a very sobering account that of all the ODA that goes towards disaster-related areas, 5% goes to prevention and preparedness, and the rest, 95%, goes to response and recovery and reconstruction. Now, of course, it's very important, response, recovery, reconstruction, and we now have a very important principle of building back better in this time, which is also about disaster risk reduction at the recovery phase. But the fact that only 5% goes into response and preparedness and prevention, I think this really tells the story of we still see prevention, putting money into prevention as a cost, not a investment. And this is also true in national budgets as well, across the board, developed, developing. Not much budget goes into prevention. And this is something that we need to do better. So across the government, prevention needs to be a budget line. It cannot be only the Disaster Risk Management Agency, in the case of Indonesia, BNPB, that has a DRR component in its budget, because all sectors affected by disaster risk reductions. And this is about putting the risk-informed budget in all sectors. Insurance, it is very important, insurance in terms of risk transfer to start with. So narrowing the risk, narrowing the protection gap in terms of insurance by insurance is very important. But I think we need to go a bit further with insurance as well, because of the sheer amount of disasters and the sheer amount of economic loss from disasters. In already many countries, the insurance and reinsurance is not coping perfectly. And premium, of course, goes up after so many disasters, right? And there will be areas which cannot be insured if it's a very well-known flood-prone area, which probably was not a flood-prone area, let's say 20 years ago, but now insurance may not cover it anymore. So what we need to also do is to find ways to make insurance also disaster risk reduction oriented. And this is something that we're doing right now with the insurance sector to see whether there can be incentives in terms of premiums so that the people can, before insuring themselves, take more measures for risk reduction. So in a nutshell, there are so many things to do, but this is the area that we need to tackle more.
Thank you. This is probably the last question because we are running out of time. From Mr. Priyanto, it is very clear that natural disasters are more often the result of damage caused by human activity. How does the GPDRR deal with this issue? One suggestion that he put is to GPDRR to be integrated with COP26. What do you think?
So thank you very much for that question. And actually, the question is so relevant. Now, in your question, sir, you said a natural disaster. And you said, but actually human activity is the cause of so many disasters. It is actually true. In the past 20 years, 90% of all major disasters are related to climate emergency one way or another. Now, the other thing I would say is that I mentioned that disaster is a combination of a hazard, which can be natural or man-made, plus vulnerability, plus exposure. So many times, if we are able to mitigate vulnerability, mitigate exposure, and even also understand the nature of the hazard better, then a hazard will not become a large disaster. It will not result in big losses of lives and livelihoods. So you are absolutely right. Many times it is the result of human action or human inaction. Now, COP26 was very telling because adaptation and resilience became a big agenda, as we all know. Of course, mitigation is important, but while we mitigate, the effect of climate emergency is affecting all countries, but in particular the LDCs, the SIDS, in such a way that, as the Secretary General has been advocating for so strongly, if we cannot enhance the ambition towards adaptation, if we cannot result the $100 billion promise from the Paris Agreement and make it 50-50 mitigation and adaptation, we cannot cope with this situation. We also went to COP26, my organization, with a message that in order to address, avert, and minimize loss and damage from disasters, we need to provide more technical support and enhance the technical capacity of developing countries to account for their loss and damages. And the third message was actually related to your question. We need to enhance more transparent financing for disaster risk reduction. So definitely, and I think your question, I will end with one important point. We need to connect all the global agenda together. Disaster risk reduction, the Sendai framework, Paris Agreement, climate emergency, the loss of biodiversity, the protection of environment. All of these have to be achieved at the same time in order to reach the achievement of SDGs. So yes, sometimes even in the UN system, we work in silos, which is not what we want to do. And this is why we have the UN reform. We have a resident coordinator. Today, I have the resident coordinator of Indonesia. For Indonesia with me, Ms. Valerie Juliet. The country team under the resident coordinator now works with the host country so that all the global agenda can be addressed at the same time. And we are very hopeful that Indonesia, with your importance in the global community, will take all the agenda together towards sustainable development goals. And again, now with your prowess, your power, and your resources, that you become also a global champion in all these global agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Excellency Mami Mizutori, for especially that last comments coming from you. I think this is a testament to the Indonesian efforts to better manage disaster. And then, of course, that could not be done without international cooperation, as this public lecture is about. That is how to enhance global cooperation in disaster risk reduction. I would not be able to summarize the rich discussion and presentation and response and questions from the audience. But if I may, there are three takeaways, if I may. Number one, disaster is a combination of hazard, vulnerability, and exposure. And I think this is a very powerful statement that would lead us to understand disasters in more systematic ways. And therefore, our response should also be systematic. It could not be sectoral. And then, as you also mentioned, even in the UN, it's sometimes we work in silo. Number two, we need to see preparedness not as a cost, but as an investment Right now, I think across the globe, Indonesia and other countries still see, as it is clear from the numbers that you are telling us, that 5% of the funds or budget tend to go to preparedness, and the rest 95% would go to the response or not into the preparedness. Number three, I think, and this is very important given that Indonesia is a young population right now. Data shows that we really have a young population, and your statement about the need to work with the youth, not for the youth, I think it's also a very important for us to understand, so that we could better manage disasters, because they are the ones who have these new skills and new knowledge, and they are more technologically advanced than the older generation, and technology certainly will also help us in facing disasters. Now, thank you very much for all the participation and questions. It is a great question that we have. If I may go back to Dr. Jose Rizal Damuri to to give some closing remarks. Pak Jose Rizal Damuri, screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Philip. Indeed, thank you very much to Excellency Mami Mizutori for a very excellent speech, a very excellent lecture that we are already hear, and hopefully this is not the only engagement with the CSIS. We look forward for more engagements in the future with SRSG and also Office for Disaster Risk Reductions. Thank you very much again for your presence here in CSIS. And also, I would like to say my appreciation to all participants who attend and join this public lecture.
Thank you, Dr. Jose Rizal Damuri. And I think with this, we should end the session. And I hope you are in a good health. If there is someone who is not in a good condition, I hope you will recover soon. And then we will meet again in other CSIS public lectures, online or hopefully physical ones in the near future. Thank you very much.